You're all welcome to the Research Coaching Masterclass. Today we are discussing how to craft compelling research problems. The initial advert was how to craft a tight research problem. And my advisors said tight is not a good word to use. It's not the best word. So I've modified it a bit to how to craft compelling research problems. Compelling research problems. So we are starting. Our outline for this workshop includes the following. We look at the problem. What is the main problem at hand that I'm so eager about teaching how to craft compelling research problems? And then we'll look at how to do problematization, the objects of problematization, the principles, problem statements, how to craft research purpose, objectives, and questions. Then we'll do a summary and we'll look at a practical way to achieve everything we have or we will learn today. If you have any question, feel free, you can put in the chat box or raise your hand and ask for me to address. Or you wait when I finish everything, you can ask your question. Either way is fine. Okay. I cannot have a full interactive session because the content is quite dense and I have to finish all in 1 hour. So however you are led, please feel free. So the objective of this lesson is to, one, at the end of this lesson, you should be able to problematize literature in your field. We'll learn what problematization is. And you should be able to discover better ways to theorize phenomena in your field. Good research comes out with theories or explains things in new ways. So you should be able to do that. And you should be able to craft compelling research problems and then compelling research questions. Before I start, I need to acknowledge my mentors. The first one is Professor Richard Boatin. He took me up after my national service and started teaching me research. He put me in my MPhil at University of Ghana Business School. And he's currently my PhD supervisor. And he has shaped my research and given me so almost everything that I know. I credit to Professor Richard Boatin. So anywhere you meet him, thank him for me. The next person I want to thank is Professor Ganoredu. He's at Gimpa School of Technology, where I currently am. He told me that I shouldn't be in industry. I should come to academia. After he read my MPhil thesis, he came to my workplace, asked me to apply to join Gimpa. And I am where I am now in Gimpa because of Professor Redu. So thank him for me. The third person I want to thank is Professor Nick Hassan. He's in the USA. It is his slides I shared with you recently when I couldn't have the workshops. And some of the slides information I'm going to share in today's class. I'm going to add it to what I have learned over the years to illustrate some major points. I also want to acknowledge the authors of this paper, Alverson and Sandberg. And it is this paper that opened my mind to understand some of the things Professor Boatin and Professor Redu were saying, and recently Professor Hassan, how to move away from simple research gaps that, oh, this research has been done, this research has been done in developed country, hasn't been done in Ghana, so I'm doing this research. It is this paper that opened my mind to look for better research problems, okay? And we'll be discussing some of the contents this morning. So we are taking the first item in our outline, the problem at hand. The problem at hand in research, from my few years experience in doing research and supervising students, shows that students do not craft compelling research questions. Compelling research questions are questions that make it urgent. It is urgent for us to do that research. For instance, it is urgent to look for an app that we can use to monitor people who are recovering from coronavirus. It is urgent. It is urgent for this is for information systems. For those in medicine or biological sciences, it is urgent that we research into a vaccine for coronavirus. It is urgent. So if you start a research into a vaccine for COVID-19, it is a compelling research question. Nobody who can tell you that this research is not important, because it will help us to solve a problem that human beings are facing today, right now, which we want to get out of. So if you start research by saying that people have looked into the factors that affect the adoption of information technology, they have done it in US, in UK, but they haven't done it in Ghana. That's why you are doing your research. It is not compelling, and you want to move beyond that. And students complain that their research is left in the library on the shelf. Nobody does anything with it. But it is because those studies don't answer compelling research questions. If we want our research to be useful, we have to answer or address compelling research questions. The second problem is that we normally do theory testing. They identify the problem for Ghana or their country in which they are, and then they choose a theory and then go and test the theory. It is not enough, especially at the master's and PhD level. Sometimes we choose over research phenomena. In my school, most students like to study technology adoption. What are the factors that will lead people to adopt my mobile phone? That will lead them to adopt social media. Adoption is an over-researched phenomenon or issue. They also tend to use over-researched or overused theories like TAM. TAM is a very simple theory, technology acceptance model. Even though it has newer or more advanced versions or more advanced theories of technology adoption has been produced, people still use TAM. And it is recently in Professor Hassan's workshop that I realized that TAM was even built on a wrong foundation. The person who did TAM, and he explained it in detail with evidence, the person who did TAM misconstrued the foundations of the theories on which he built TAM. So if today you also use TAM to explain technology adoption, you are misleading your readers. You see, so we don't go back to track the foundation of the theories we use. And this is one of the problems we have at hand. And when they choose these theories they misapply them. They misapply them because they don't use the factors and the constructs and the relationships and the underlying assumptions of the theory in their work. Some of them will take a portion and leave others, just like what TAM did. So this workshop is not for everybody. It is for people who are interested in doing good research, people who want to craft compelling research problems. Okay. It is not everybody who wants to. Some people do research, they just want to publish this, they send it to predatory journals, or they give their work to so-called contractors, and they just do their work, submit it, and they are gone. This workshop is for people who want to craft good research problems. And Professor Hassan mentioned something that I will show later on. He shows that there's somebody who crafted a certain compelling question which won him the Nobel Prize in his career. Okay, so crafting a good research problem can win you the Nobel Prize. I'm not saying your PhD or your MSc will win you the Nobel Prize, but it is something to aspire to. Okay, but not everybody wants that. Some people want excellence, and this workshop is for some people who want that level of excellence. Not everybody cares. Not everybody wants to do good work. If you want to do good work, you can remain here. So, based on this background, I hope you are interested. You want to do good research. If you are still here, you want to do good research. My own research today, based on what I know now, tell me that I have not been doing good work. So I surrender. If I will not use my past research as a yardstick, and I have repented from crafting non-compelling research questions. Okay. So in the first masterclass, I gave an overview of how to do research from the beginning to the end. And I mentioned that in the first step, you have to problematize the literature in your domain. I just mentioned it. I said that you should download sample literature, scrutinize the debates, critiques, and the challenges in the domain assumptions, and then it will lead you to crafting a novel research question. But today we want to take it into detail and how to actually do it step by step. So what is problematization? Problematization is generating novel research questions by interrogating your own position about a phenomenon and then interrogating other people's stance or what other people are saying in the literature so that you can challenge the existing assumptions. So you have the mindset that what previous research has done is good, but there could be another way of looking at the issue. There could be another way of explaining the issue. Your ability to interrogate the existing literature based on those factors that we are coming to look at and coming out with a novel or a compelling research question is what we call problematization. And I've given the reference down there. You can download the article, which I showed earlier, to read the article in full. So what are the implications for problematization? The first thing is that you have to interrogate your own position. Maybe you have an understanding of a certain issue or a topic, but you have to be open-minded that that understanding may be flawed and that there may be another way to explain the issue. Okay. Then you look at other people's stance. Maybe someone wants to explain. I'll be using examples from information systems because that is my field. If you do not understand an explanation, you can draw my attention. But in the literature, people explain the factors that lead people to adopt a technology from a psychological point of view, that people's mindset, people's perceptions can lead them to use the technology. Then somebody can say that, no, the technology itself can attract somebody to use it. It's not only based on what the person thinks about it. So here we will have people who think that the human being's own perception lead them to use the technology. Another school of thought will say that it is the technology itself that is attracting the people to use the technology. Then someone says that no, instead of looking at the technology alone and the human beings alone, shouldn't there be a way where somebody sees the technology, interacts with the technology, and sees the technology's usefulness before adopting the technology? So here you are combining the human element and the social element to explain why people adopt technology. Okay, so based on challenging existing ways of looking at issues, it will lead you to crafting a new or a novel research problem or research question. So I found this article that did something close to what I have just said. If we read this abstract from this paper, it says that this paper is about ICT for development. ICT for development is saying that when you introduce information technologies to an area or a country, it can bring about development or positive change in the area. Okay. So this article reviewed the literature about ICT for development and saw that there are two main ways of explaining the development that technologies bring about. So it's saying that the first group of people in ICT for D explain ICT for D in terms of the capabilities approach. The capabilities approach says that when you introduce a technology, it improves what people can do. If somebody was a seamstress, now because of technology, the person can do more, can sew more, or can advertise on the internet. This is the capability approach. And when the person can do more, the person can earn more and maybe improve upon his or her well-being. The second approach in ICT for D is saying that when you introduce technology, it rather reduces the people's vulnerabilities. If the person was poor, now the person has a mobile phone. The person can make a phone call, which he couldn't have made without the mobile phone. So these are two approaches. And you cannot see these two streams if you don't do problematization. You have to critique certain elements in the literature. When you download 100 articles and you are reading, there are certain things you should be looking out for so that you can identify these different streams that will help you to come out with a new way of understanding the literature or the field. So in the presentation, you'll be seeing senior tips. Senior tips are from the slides I shared with you earlier from Professor Hassan. Okay. So when you are doing problematization, Professor Hassan explains that you have to look at the research questions, the constructs, the myths, paradigms, metaphors, analogies, concepts, hypotheses, statements, and laws that you are seeing in the articles you are reading. You may see a metaphor in article A. You may see a certain hypothesis in article B. How do these two compare with each other? And how do they come together under a theme? Like in the example I shared from the previous paper, they are saying that ICTs can either reduce vulnerabilities or enhance people's capabilities. These two understandings or assumptions are quite different. Okay, so if somebody is doing research based on the capability approach, he wants to, when he's collecting data, he wants to understand how the technology has improved on what the people were able to do. If someone is also doing research based on the vulnerabilities approach, he wants to find out from the people what they couldn't do earlier and what the technology is helping them to do now. Okay, so the mindset you go into your research with has a very big implication on your outcomes. Okay. So let's look at the objects of problematization in detail. The first thing you should problematize is what Alverson and Sambel calls in-house assumptions. And in-house assumptions are how previous researchers have understood or explained an issue or a phenomenon over time. And other people will also be using this same approach. They will carry on their approach over time, and it will become an established way of explaining an issue. Previously, people thought that the earth was flat. And so everything that human beings did was based on the fact that the earth was flat. Then somebody came with a new assumption, a new explanation that no, the earth is not flat, it is spherical. Now it changes our paradigm. It changes how we should even measure time. It changes how we should navigate the earth. Okay, so the in-house assumptions shape how future research about an issue should be done. And so I want to illustrate with the same ICT4D field that I mentioned earlier. The in-house assumptions in ICT4D is that ICTs either reduce vulnerabilities or expand capabilities. Okay, so these are two different schools of thought about ICT for development. So as you are reading the literature, ask yourself, what is this author assuming in this paper I'm reading? What is the school of thought? What are the assumptions that are shaping this study? Now, the next object of problematization is the root metaphor. When you are reading research, you see that some articles will relate the issue with a metaphor. A metaphor is a figurative tool that we use to explain an issue. For instance, we can explain the coronavirus right now. We can explain it as a boiling pot. A boiling pot because everybody is hot. People are losing their jobs. People's business are going down. People are having salary cuts. Everybody is hot. So we can explain, or we can describe the current pandemic as a boiling pot. Okay. So when you are reading the literature in your work, people use these metaphors to explain the phenomenon. If you describe something as a boiling pot, it is quite different from describing the same thing as a deep freezer. So if somebody wants to research into the coronavirus pandemic as if it was a boiling pot, it will be quite different from how somebody would describe it as a deep freezer. The person describing it as a deep freezer may see the pandemic as something that has brought everything to a standstill. Nothing is moving, nothing is working, nothing is functioning as it was supposed to function or as it was functioning before. Okay, so look out for metaphors in your work and see how you can also create a new metaphor, a new way of seeing the phenomenon. So for instance, I can describe the same coronavirus pandemic as a dictatorship. Why is it a dictatorship? WHO says that wear a mask. Everybody has to wear a mask. Your government says that stay in the room. Don't go out for 3 weeks. You have to stay in the room for 3 weeks. Wear a mask. Otherwise, you'll be fined 18,000 Ghana cedis. You have to wear it. Okay. So, and describing it as a dictatorship has different implications for and can generate new research questions that we can do research on. So I can describe ICT for development as either a restitution or a benevolent dictatorship. Okay. Apart from being a way to enhance capabilities or reducing vulnerabilities. Okay. Another way to problematize literature is to look at the paradigm, the research paradigm that was used to do the work. But Hassan doesn't want our advice is that we should go beyond just paradigm problematization, because it forces you to think only around four paradigms. For instance, in information system, we have just 4 paradigms. We have positivism, interpretivism, critical theory, and critical realism. So you take 100 articles, and most of them are positivists. They all do quantitative work and they all define reality objectively. So you say that no, most of the research have been done from a positivist paradigm. So you are doing interpretivist. Just like that, it is not enough problematization. And I'll show you a better example of of paradigms in a subsequent slide. So the next way of problematizing is to challenge the existing ideologies behind a topic. Is somebody speaking? We want to look at how to problematize the ideologies behind an issue. So we're using the same ICT for D. Instead of looking at how technology improves people's capabilities or reduces people's vulnerabilities, why not ask that when you bring ICTs, when you introduce information technologies, one can ask that instead of just studying how the technology improves capabilities or reduces vulnerabilities, can't we see that when you introduce technology, women become victims? Because existing research shows that women are less technology savvy. Women don't tend to use technology more. They use technology less often, or they are quite averse to technology as compared to men. So when you introduce a technology like mobile phones or a new community center or social media, it makes women victim to the new situation. Okay, this is an ideological way of doing problematization. So you can challenge the political ideology, the moral, the gender-related assumptions behind a body of research. And this can create a new stream of research for the phenomenon you want to study. The last one is failed assumptions. Failed assumptions pertain to how the existing assumptions that the discipline you are studying has espoused over the years. For instance, ICT4D assumes that once you introduce a technology, there should be development. Look at in Ghana, we computerized our ports. The assumption behind computerizing the port is that once there is technology, everything in the port will go smoothly. We will have revenues increasing. We will have everybody having efficient services. But in the first week or first month that the port was computerized, look at the challenges that came up. Look at the strikes that the various unions embarked on. So it wasn't that smooth. Okay. So if you challenge what the discipline is saying, that once this is there, this should come up, and you have new evidence to illustrate that this relationship is not always so, you are headed for having a very compelling research question. So I'd like you to write down your discipline, write down the variables you like to study. In the first masterclass, we said that it is good that you have in your topic one independent variable and then one dependent variable, so that you look at the link between the two. So for instance, how does social media help to increase business profitability? Business profitability is your dependent variable and social media is your independent variable. It is good that your topic always has these two elements. Okay. Now, when you have these two elements, you are supposed to problematize your independent variable or your dependent variable to explain the discourse or the assumptions around these two variables, so that based on whether you are problematizing the metaphor, the in-house assumptions, or the paradigms, it will help you to channel or create a new path that you can do your research on to craft a new topic area. So senior tip from Hassan explains some words around problematization. The first one is discourse. Discourse in a topic is about the rules that define how things should be studied. For instance, you can't do information systems research without explaining the role of technology in the phenomenon you are studying. There are people who are doing design science research. You can't do design science research without developing an artifact and even evaluating the artifact. You can't do that. If you are doing economics, I've seen some economics and finance friends in the list. You can't do a finance research without explaining how the organization or the country you are studying would attract new sources of funds and manage it efficiently in order to achieve organizational goals. You can't, that objective has to be there. So if you are doing finance and you go and study the role of technology in private sector banking, you are deviating from your discipline's discourse. Okay, so you have to be careful of what is permitted in your research discipline and what is allowed so that you can problematize that area. When you are done with your discourse, you look at models. When you are reading your articles, some articles will come up with research models. Research model can be sometimes in a diagram form, sometimes it's in a mathematical form, depending on your discipline. That model explains a portion of the phenomenon under study. Okay, so you should take note of those models too. It is those models that you can critique. Those models you can critique to show that this model has a loophole. This model doesn't explain this issue in the phenomenon, or it explains the issue from this perspective. It doesn't explain it from this perspective. Okay, and it can help you to craft a research problem which is compelling. And for the master's level, especially MPhil and PhD, you are expected to come up with a theoretical contribution. And so if you are able to problematize existing models, you are off to a flying start. If you take a model, it may not be self-explanatory. So a model has to be, or a full theory has to be explained. What are the constructs? What do the constructs mean? What are the assumptions behind the construct? And how are the constructs related to each other? When you have a paper that explains all these issues around the model, then you are having a framework. Okay, so a framework includes the context of the theory. It includes the history, the assumptions, other theories that it has borrowed from, the main concept, construct variables, and then propositions or hypotheses. All these issues around that model will give you a framework. And there are some papers that have frameworks too. So look out for all these ones. I'll show you how to take notes of them so that you can problematize them. I've explained framework. So what are the principles of problematization? What should you follow when you are doing problematization? The first thing is that you should identify a domain of literature. If you're in marketing, you should be looking for something around relationships, around customer relationships. If you're in finance, you're looking for how to attract funding and so on. I am in information systems, and in my recent work, I've been looking at value, information system value. How can technology produce value for people who use them? And I looked at the music industry. So in my literature readings, I was looking for how digital platforms can create value for the music industry. And I realized that the literature has two forms of value. The literature assumes that it is only customers that can get value, or the organization that is offering the product or service. These are the only two forms of value I found in the literature: customer value and organizational value. So I put all the forms of value I found in a table like this. The table is longer. So you see that this paper in 1988, 2000, 2001, 2015, and so on. If you look on the left-hand side, you see IS-based value conceptualization. These are the forms of value that previous research has been studying. So it becomes a trend that everybody is studying customer value, everybody is studying business value or organizational value. It brings up the assumption that previous researchers assume that value accrues to only customers or organizations. So I begin to question myself, truly, is it only customers and organizations that should have value? Is it, if it is not, what other people can have value? Then a new question occurs. If other people can have value, what are the other people who can have value beyond the customers and the organization? And how do those other forms of value occur or accrue to them? Okay. So the next thing is to identify and articulate these assumptions. So this, what I said earlier, is the articulation of assumptions, but you have to write it out in your work. Okay, you can write it out in your problem statement, especially. And you can write a very good problem statement after you have problematized the literature in your chapter 2. So my supervisor, Professor Boatin, advises that you start, if you are doing your project work, start with chapter 2. Start with chapter 2. But as you are writing the chapter 2, you can be writing the chapter 1 alongside, because the literature you'll be citing in your problem statement will be in your literature review. So you can do them alongside, but you can get a very good research problem after you have done a thorough literature review, or at least a preliminary literature review. So, senior tip, as you are reading the literature, you should be asking yourself these questions. Do I know the topic and why it matters? Do I know the key theories, concepts, and assumptions that existing frameworks use? Do you know the history behind the traditions in the articles you are reading? And are you just adding a variable to an existing theory just to go and test? Okay. So you should ask yourself these questions. And as you're asking yourself this question, you are writing it down. I'll show you where to write these things. Okay, so this is something I wrote in my own work. So after critiquing the literature, I said that despite the insights from the definitions presented, definitions of value, okay, that I showed in the earlier table, they assume that value manifests either at the firm level or to customers. So they call it customer value, customer perceived value. This is the assumption I identified in my readings. Okay. So I'm not saying that once you problematize the literature, you are perfect or you are done. Of course, if you send your work out, reviewers will check it, editors will review the work and check whether you are making good claims. If it is a good claim, your paper will be accepted, your research will be accepted. If it is not, or there are some deficiencies, you'll be prompted that consider this, and consider that. Then you make your work better. You are not a store of all knowledge. You are attempting to address a problem that you are identifying in research. So be open-minded, okay, for feedback about your research. Now, when you have made these claims, you should evaluate the articulated assumptions. Ask yourself, is it good? Does it explain? Do the assumptions I've observed explain everything? And these new assumptions that I want to introduce, is it worthy? Is it worthy of bringing them up? Does it solve a problem that currently still exists in the world or even in the literature? Ask yourself. If it is worthy, then you move on. So I mentioned in my work that this assumption is limited in multi-sided platform settings. So the earlier assumption that it's only the organization or the customers that get value. If you bring it into the context of digital platforms, which I was studying, those assumptions become a little limited. Because in platforms, we have the firm, the organization that owns the platform. We have the people who are selling a product or a service on the platform. And we have the customers who are buying the services. And you even have competitors who are also watching the platform and creating something for themselves. So right now you have 4 different stakeholders who are around platforms. Existing literature about value talks about only the firm and the customers. So the new assumptions I'm bringing up will help us to explain value that accrues to the firm, the customer, competitors, and sellers on a platform. You see, if we continue to hold on to the customer and the firm level alone, we will have a limited understanding of value. Hence, the need to continue with the research. I saw a hand up, Alfred. Alfred. Please unmute yourself and speak. Okay, Alfred seems to be lost. All right, the 4th principle is that you should develop alternative assumptions. Now you are critiquing the previous assumptions in the literature. What is the alternative that you are producing that you want to bring up? Senior tip on this issue. So this is where metaphors come in. As I mentioned earlier, I gave the example with coronavirus, seeing it as a boiling pot or a deep freezer or a dictatorship. Okay, so you can have an analogy that explains the phenomenon in a different way. It could be a story, a short story that brings a certain perspective of the issue in a different light that we didn't know earlier. Okay. So if you are able to bring up a new analogy or a new metaphor, it can start a new way of problematizing the literature and bring up a new topic. So this continues. This is an example of how somebody created a metaphor to explain how managers use information. So the example is that people, okay, let me use this one rather. This one that won the Nobel Peace Prize. Hello, Jennifer. Jennifer, do you have a question?
Hello, sir.
Yes, please ask.
According to your problematization, let's say you don't have a research topic now. Is it a problem, your research problem, that will make you finalize on your topic?
Okay, thank you. If you don't have a topic, it means that you don't know which literature you should even start reading. Because your field is broad. There are so many issues that are going on in your field. So in the first masterclass, I said that you yourself, you should identify a phenomenon in your discipline that you are interested in. You can't be interested in all the phenomenon happening in your discipline at once. If you take IT, we have artificial intelligence, there's blockchain going on, there's social media, there's big data, there is machine learning. You have to identify at one of them. When you identify one of them, then you go and read the literature around that phenomenon. Then you problematize that literature and then you get your research problem. When you get a research problem, you can come out with a topic.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so Schelling is the one who won the Nobel Prize on research. He explained phenomenon pandemics as a thermostat. Okay, so he said that you know how thermostats work? There's a thermostat in your freezer or fridge or even an air conditioner. So the thermostat reads the temperature and then adjusts the device to meet the temperature that is supposed to meet. So if it's an air conditioner, for instance, it will check if it's set on automatic, it will check the room temperature. If the room is hotter or warmer than it's supposed to be, it will increase the cooling. If it reaches the temperature that you have set, maybe 25 degrees or 24 degrees, then it reduces it. So at every point in time, the room is expected to be at 24 degrees. If somebody opens the door and hot air enters the room, you see the air conditioner coming up again to cool the room to come to 24 degrees. So Schelling described pandemics as the way a thermostat works. Okay, and it was able to, so that's why people are saying that there's going to be a second wave for coronavirus, because it is being called a pandemic. It didn't get to where they were expecting it to get. So there's going to be a second wave so that it will get to the pandemic level. Okay. So the explanation of pandemics as a thermostat won Schelling and Nobel Peace Prize, because we hadn't explained pandemics in that way before, and it created a new way of understanding pandemics. That's why it is based on this research why they said that we should stay in the room so that the virus spreading will not become exponential, so that the curve will be flattened. Okay, it is based on this research that all those explanations and pandemic management came about. Okay. Now we can use paradigms, as I've mentioned already, but using either positivist, interpretivist, or critical is not enough. So Hassan showed this. If you look on the left-hand side, we have these paradigms in information systems. It cuts across the social science research. But if you look on the right, you have a whole list of other paradigms and a new way of explaining issues, a new way of explaining phenomena. Okay, and it is coming from Kuhn 1970. Kuhn 1970 is a book called I've forgotten the title. Something on scientific revolutions. It's a book that explains various paradigms and how to explain new research areas. Okay. So we should go beyond our existing paradigms of positivism, interpretivism, and critical realism. Okay. So he uses this research to also explain a new paradigm. Okay. This research generates a theory called the media richness theory. And this is how it came about. The authors realized that the authors wanted to explain how managers use information. And they are saying that managers are busy people, and they may not have time to even read articles, full reports, full official reports. Imagine that you are in the work and you produce a 50-page report for your manager. Do you think that managers will have a time to read that 50-page or 100-page report? That's why you have the executive summary. So they read the executive summary, and all the other parts, they are expected to have summarized all the other parts, and it's enough. So these people who did the media richness theory say that, so if you want to give managers information, what is the best way to give them the information? And what is the best medium to use? Okay, so they came from a linguistic paradigm that shows that managers like to use informal communications. When managers will sit at lunch and discuss business strategy, okay? But if you give them formal information in reports and so on, it may be difficult for you to have their attention. So they came out with this theory called the media richness theory that says that if you want to give managers information that is formal or that doesn't have so many nuances in it where you don't have to explain issues over and over, then use face-to-face meetings. If the information you are giving has to be structured, there's no two ways about it, then you have to use a formal report. Okay, but hitherto there was nothing to explain it in this way. And this issue is a compelling research issue because a manager is the head of an organization. The more information that a manager has access to, the better decisions the manager can make. And it's a strategic issue. Okay, so the problem of addressing the best way to give information to managers was compelling at that time. Okay. So I showed this earlier, and I want to show how, as a very simple way, I did it in my work. So after critiquing the various studies on value, I said that I gave an alternative assumption, and I said that therefore we turn to another understanding of value in the term value added, which is the process of firms transforming matter to change its form, time, place, and possession. The end of this process is the value, which describes an offering which is useful to the customer or beneficiary. The context is the connection between all connected actors and resources, which provide a platform for actors to experience value. Now, I am working on digital platforms. Okay, so I show that when you bring this new form of value into the context of digital platforms, you have a new set of actors or a new set of beneficiaries, which is not just the customer, it's not just the organization. New forms of value come up, and these new forms of value that come up have to be considered in future research. Okay, so this is the alternative assumption that I introduced in my study. And because of this new assumption, if you look down this table, you see you have digital platform value. In the previous literature, there's nothing like digital platform value. So the new assumption that I'm proposing creates the need to introduce a new term called digital platform value. All the previous types of value have been explaining customer value and organizational value. Nobody, arguably, is explaining digital platform value. Hence, we need a new type of value. This is the alternative assumption. Okay. So the last principle is that you should relate your new assumption to your audience. You write about it. You write about it in your research problem. That's it. And in relating to your audience, you can also do a summary table like I'm showing. So in the first column, you see all the theories and frameworks and models that I found in existing literature. Then I show the constructs and the logic behind those theories and frameworks. What are the variables in those theories? Then I show the context that those theories were used, and I provide the literature. Then I show the limitations and assumptions, the assumptions behind those theories and the limitations behind those assumptions. And it is clear. So you show evidence of what you are doing. Okay, if you don't show this evidence, you cannot just say that existing research is limited, existing theories are limited, they don't explain this. You have to show the evidence that this is what they have been doing and this is the limitation. Then your reader or your audience will see that truly you have evidence from the literature. They are not saying it off head. So this is a continuation of the table. Then you also have to evaluate your own assumptions. You are saying that we should use your alternative assumption to the literature. But is it the best? Is it the best way to go about it? You have to evaluate it. And you can evaluate it by explaining why it holds in the new context. You can evaluate it by showing that all the previous ways that have been used in literature cannot explain the new phenomenon that you want to study. Okay, so let's look at this slide. In summary, existing theoretical frameworks on value creation have various shortfalls. They are either variance models or process models which have firm level value outcomes. They simply cannot explain how stakeholders who use a digital platform can create value for themselves. Digital platform value is created for at least 4 different stakeholders. Existing research is saying that there are only 2 people who can get value, customers or firms. It is insufficient. If we continue using customer value and firm value or firm level value, we will not be able to explain how the other 2 stakeholders in digital platforms get value. So we need a new way to explain the value. Okay. So if you look at the last sentence, we need to know how music industry actors use information systems and the potential consequences thereof. Digital platforms create a new avenue for us to understand the phenomenon of value. If you're able to do all this, you would have achieved your first step in research to problematize the literature in your domain. And based on the problematization, you can craft your research problem or your problem statement. Okay, so if you put all the things I have showed about assumptions, alternative assumptions, and relating to the audience, you can craft your research problem, which is compelling. Okay, and one thing to note about a compelling research question is that no other discipline apart from your discipline should be able to answer that question. People in finance cannot create a vaccine for coronavirus. It is only those in medicine, only those in maybe chemistry can produce a new, can research into a vaccine for coronavirus. Okay. So you craft the question in such a way that no other discipline will be able to answer your research question. And it is because you'd have critiqued the assumptions in the previous literature in a way that matches the rules in your discipline. So in reference to Jennifer's question earlier, when you identify your own topic or the area you want to research and you read the literature, compile several topics or several problems that occur to you so that you can have backup. You can fall on one if the other one is not working out. So there's a place to put all these questions so that you can keep track of them. I'll show you very soon. So when you finish problematizing, your summary can be your research problem or your problem statement. So in summary, based on my own work, in summary, this study identifies 3 knowledge gaps. The first gap is the lack of theorization in digital platforms research in general. The second one is a lack of explanations of the outcomes and goals achieved from using these technologies. And the third gap is explaining what the technologies afford in specific industries. And the outcomes here is the value that we get from using these technologies. Okay, so this becomes your problem statement. And based on the problem statement, you can craft your research purpose. So your research purpose should be a direct response to the gaps you have identified in the literature. So my research purpose is to develop a framework that explains how digital platforms afford or constrain value in Ghana's music industry. You see, and this purpose is because I'm saying that we don't understand how digital platforms create value. We don't understand how digital platforms create value in specific industries. Therefore, I want to study how digital platforms create value in the music industry. but I can't do the music industry of the whole world. So you have to choose a context. So of Ghana. But Ghana is also chosen as a context because the musicians in Ghana are complaining. They say they are not making money from their music. They say when they launch an album, nobody buys it. But by the time you realize the music is everywhere and everybody is playing it. Meanwhile, they pay money to DJs and radio stations for them to play the music on air for them. So they are incurring costs, but they are not getting much value from their music. Okay. So how can they use digital platforms to create value for themselves? This is, to the best of my abilities, a compelling research question. It is up to my supervisors and examiners to give me the feedback, the final go ahead that truly this is a compelling research question. Okay. Based on your research purpose, you break it down and you get your research objectives. And Professor Boateng showed me that for every research objective that you state, you should explain how you intend to achieve it. How do you intend to address or achieve that research objective? So I broke down my research purpose into 3. The first one is that I want to explain the affordances of the platforms in digital music industry in Ghana. How will I achieve that? I will use the theory of affordance and constraints to...
Yeah. So
Pardon? Pardon? So I created this research objective from the research purpose and explain how I'm going to achieve the research, this particular research objective. And I even showed in the write-up where these issues have been addressed, where I achieved the research objectives. So you are advised to do that. If you are doing a dissertation, it is good that you show the reader or your examiner where you have achieved these areas. It makes for easier reading. Okay, this is a senior tip from Professor Boateng. If it's a paper, normally, if it's a research paper, you see that in the introduction, they write over there that after writing the research problem, they give a summary of the methods that they are going to use to address the research gap, and even give us a summary of the findings. Okay, so generally, I think it is good practice to do that. And this is the 3rd objective. Based on the research objective, you have your research question. This one, there's a debate around it, whether you should just turn your research objectives into research questions or into question interrogative form to get your questions. Honestly, that is what I did. Okay, so I turned my objectives into interrogative form to get my research questions. So far as answering the research questions helps you to achieve your research purpose, I believe that you are on track. Again, do the best you can using the best resources that you can. When you send to your supervisor, and your supervisor will give you feedback on what you have done. It's better to do something good to be on track than to be doing something substandard for you to be frustrated. Okay. So what I'm sharing is not 100%. I'll give myself 45%. But that 45% is what your supervisor will build on for you to approach 80% or 90%. Based on how compelling your research is, you can write a research significance. And the research significance is in 3 areas. How important is your research to research? Sorry, yes, it's your research to existing research or the discipline in terms of how it helps us to explain phenomena that we didn't explain better. And how is your research going to help us to draft new policy? What are the policy implications of your research? And what are the practical implications also of your research? Hello. If you look at... Hello, Edwin. Yeah.
You said something about before this one about the significance. Please, can you explain it? That it's better to do something before.
Okay, I said that it's better. You will be able to write a better and more complete research significance when you are done with the work. But if you are, I know some people are writing proposals. You are supposed to write research significance in your proposal. So if you be able to do very good problematization of the literature, you can have a fair idea of the findings that your work will generate. For instance, if you have generated a new metaphor to explain the phenomenon, you can say that your work is going to propose a new metaphor and a better way of explaining the phenomenon. Okay, you can state that for now as the initial significance. And when you are done with the work, you can come and augment the research significance aspect with the findings and the new things that you have found out from your work.
Okay. Okay. So therefore, we the IT students that we are using design science, how can we do that?
Okay, so if you are doing design science, your significance can come from the novelty of the artifacts.
Oh, okay.
You know that from the literature, you know that this kind of artifact or this way you are going to develop the artifact hasn't been done before, or even
Okay.
the new design you are bringing to the artifact hasn't been done before. So
Okay.
from the outset, you know that there's a potential contribution.
Okay.
So, but when you are done with the work, you have finished evaluating, you can bring in the findings you are getting from your research to come and augment the significance to show that truly this is what you wanted to do, and this is what your data is showing that you have been able to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So initially in your research, in your proposal or in your chapter 1, your research significance can be about 500 words. When I was writing mine, I was struggling to write the research significance. I didn't know what to write. Even after doing the study, I was struggling to top up. It is Professor Boat who showed me that, Joseph, you have this contribution in this area, expand it. And when I expanded it, I was getting to about 1,500 words to 2,000 words. Okay. So when you are done with the work, you yourself will see that these are the areas that I have contributed to. If you did the problematization right. Okay. As for chapter outline, it is quite straightforward. How many chapters do you have in your work? And what will each chapter contain? So from research background, research problem, research purpose, research objective, research questions, research significance, and chapter outline, you have your chapter 1. But as I mentioned, you would be able to do a good research problem, craft a good research purpose if you have done a preliminary literature review. Okay. So before I do the Q&A, let's see. Okay. Let's take the Q&A if anybody has a question. We have gone overboard. Thank you for staying throughout. If you have a question, please ask. Just unmute yourself and ask.
So,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to know, as you've told me about the design science, my topic is um, book, bookstore inventory, bookstore inventory management system, and I want to know how. I know there are a lot of literature out there, and my problem is, let's say I have about the 50 articles. How can I problem problematize them, then come up with the ones you mentioned, the phenomenon, the new phenomenon using the design science, and the metaphor, and the analogs. How can
Please,
I do it?
you can't do all the 5 at once. So choose one. Okay. The 5 I showed are the 5 different ways to do good problematization.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so choose one. So maybe previous literature have looked at a bookstore as if it was let's say a tabletop business.
Oh, okay.
So they develop the bookstore website as if people will just come there, come and buy, pay and go.
Oh, okay.
But recently, you know that people want more than just buying, paying and leaving. They want an engagement.
Oh, okay.
So some people may even want to experience the book before they buy. Somebody wants to look at the table of content, even look at maybe a preface, read something little about the book, and even engage, have a conversation with the author before they buy. Okay, so this new way of describing, so you are describing the previous artifact as if they were tabletop businesses, but now you are bringing in a new analogy to explain that books are sold using relationships. So before somebody will sell a book, the author or the reader wants to have a certain relationship with the author. This is an assumption, okay?
Okay.
So based on this new assumption, you want to develop a new type of bookstore that helps the author to establish a relationship with the reader before he or she sells the book.
Okay.
So you are going to introduce something like virtual reality. You are going to introduce something like artificial intelligence. So in your app, before the reader will buy the book, he can ask the author some questions, and a chatbot, based on the responses that the reader will give, will tell you that, oh, you can read this book, or this book is good for you, this book is not good for you, before the reader buys. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
I get it.
So
Yeah.
okay.
More of like a chatting room like this, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir. I encourage all of us, based on what we have learned, to do a simple structure for our literature review. So you can have something like this. So literature review will be on chapter 2. You begin with chapter 2.1. Section 2.1 is a chapter overview. What is the chapter about? In this chapter, you are going to review literature or articles about the area to look for new areas or new topics you can research on. And then you come to the overview of the topic area. In the overview of the topic area, this is where you bring your definitions and critique the assumptions behind these definitions. You can also look at the analogies and metaphors that you can see in previous research. And then you look at the dominant areas or dominant issues that the previous researchers have been looking at. Then you look at the dominant conceptual approaches. Then the dominant theories that have been used. These are the conceptual approaches or the theories. Then based on what you are finding, what are the gaps? The gaps is where you begin your problematization. Based on what you have seen in the issues in section 2.3, what new things come to mind? How can we challenge the limitations in the research? Then you have, that's where you give you the issue gaps under section 2.5. Then you go to the gaps in the conceptual approaches. How have the previous theories used not explained the phenomenon to the best of your knowledge? Then you go to implications for this study. Based on what you have learned from the previous research, what are you going to do in your research? So you say that, okay, previous research have been looking at adoption. If we use Seram's topic, previous research have studied the adoption of technology in teaching at the senior high schools. These studies assume that the teachers only adopt, but they don't use it to achieve any curriculum objectives. But this is a flaw, because the teachers should have a certain objective in mind and the reason why they are going to adopt these technologies. Therefore, in this study, you are going to explain how the teachers adopt the technology and how they use it to achieve curriculum objectives. Okay, so that will be the implication for the study. Then you summarize the whole chapter, also in 500 words. This number of words I have there are tentative. Depending on your school and where you are submitting to, you may have to either increase or decrease them. For instance, if you are writing a research paper, you can't have a literature review of over 3,000 words. You have to aim at 500 words section. Okay. I'm reading this paper my supervisor shared with me. And it's the literature review is just about 500 words. And it's a summary, if you read it carefully, it's a summary of the gaps and then the implications for this study. That forms the whole literature review. This is a research article. Okay, if you look at the literature review from here, 2.1 up to 2.2, you see. It is a very short literature review. It doesn't go beyond 3,000 words. So depending on where you are sending your write-up, you have to augment or reduce this number of words. So thank you very much for staying with me, even beyond the 1 hour I promised. I suspected we'll go beyond 1 hour, but you have stayed. Thank you very much. Let's keep in touch on the Facebook group. If you haven't joined, kindly join. You can also visit the website for more articles. And now that we have done the WhatsApp group, we'll be getting more information from there to guide us on how to finish our research projects. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, Joe. Can I ask a question real quick?
Okay.
Oh, I was going to ask that the in-house assumptions that you have, you mentioned Anderson and something. So I just needed the last name. On the assumptions that exist within a specific school of thought, we are talking about in-house assumptions. You mentioned Anderson.
Alverson and Sandberg. I'm showing it on the screen now.
Okay, good. Okay. Anderson and Sandberg. 1 minute.